It's the first week of trading in 2026, and despite a US military operation in Venezuela, we're surprisingly greeted by green markets. Now, crypto in particular is rallying with hope and with optimism after a disappointing Q4, where unfortunately most of our coins bled out against the dollar, and more notably against gold and silver, which both enjoyed generational rallies and they printed new all-time highs. So do me a favor and subscribe to Solana Floor if you are new here, because today we're diving into why crypto is rallying in the first full week of trading, what the $25 billion raised across crypto last year actually tells us about 2026, and of course the real alpha from experts, including their 2026 prediction reports. Now yes, gold has been on a tear for a while and crypto prices have been suffering, but you'll be pleased to hear that one of the many 2026 reports that we found even went as far as suggesting that Bitcoin will eventually overtake the $18 trillion gold market and it will trade above $1 million per coin. Now we'll get back to when that might happen in just a second, but the report basically says the entire framework for this market is shifting because the 4-year cycle is dead, ETFs are absorbing all the supply, volatility is declining, and most importantly, institutions are buying even when price dumps for weeks. And we found other reports like this K33 research paper which corroborates some of these ideas. What we didn't do though is a Nostradamus.
Nostradamus, when making his forecasts, would do it at night. It's slightly crepuscular now, but it's not yet night. And he would look into a bowl of water and allow himself to fall into an hypnotic state to try and see the future.
So the key message that we find in the reporting is clear. 2026 is the year of crypto going fully mainstream, breaking the 4-year cycle, and if the Clarity Act finally passes, then we could see crypto setting new all-time highs in 2026. But first up, markets are rallying this week, yet we don't know if it's a real recovery or just a temporary relief. Because we just lived through a painful Q4, and alts bled out against the dollar, yes, but especially against gold and silver, which both printed impressive new all-time highs.
But to be honest, the back end of 2025 has been shitty. It's made most of us question what the hell is going on. Is it all about the 4-year cycle? Are we missing something? Why are equities getting the party and we're not? Why is gold getting the party and we're not?
So it's understandable if you're looking at this early January green and thinking, is this just a minor relief rally or a real recovery? But that confusion doesn't negate the fact that over the last week or so, we've seen BTC rally 7%, ETH rallied 10%, and Sol led the rally with a tasty 14% move to the upside. Important to note here that this time, Memecoins and ETFs led the rally. Spot ETFs recorded $16.8 million in net inflows yesterday, which is the largest single day of inflows that we've seen over the last 20 days. And with Sol ETFs finally surpassing $1 billion of AUM, the Solana ecosystem is naturally wondering if we're already back and when we might see even bigger rallies. DeFi Llama News had a similar report mentioning that Pepe jumped 34% as the somewhat disgraced crypto influencer James Wynn called for a huge 2026 Pepe rally. Now, having said that, this user reminds us that alts leading the rally is often testament that any upside is strictly relief. While another user responded that usually if there is a pump on a token that already dropped by 90%, then we're most likely looking at market maker activity because, well, a majority of the supply is likely held by the team and the market makers, and it becomes very easy for them to manipulate price. And finally, on the meme coin front, we have everyone's favorite uncle, Mr. P. Tardio, reminding us that while market caps may be moving, long gone are the days of buoyant optimism of 12 months ago. But aside from which assets lead the rally, the previous cycle's raises are also important to gauge where we're going next. DeFi Llama reports that fundraising by crypto businesses reached over $25 billion in 2025, and that shattered analyst expectations, though we'd only see just north of $18 billion. But even more impressive was that the top 10 raises alone brought in over $10 billion last year. Now, this is one of those overlooked developments which actually really matters going into 2026, because that $25 billion is going to be deployed in things like scaling operations, hiring new talent, and of course, distributing new crypto products and services across the world. This cannot be understated, because the 4 largest raises in crypto history happened within the last 12 months. So when we look at the top raises, it's no surprise that Binance leads with a $2 billion strategic round, led of course by the Abu Dhabi-based fund MGX. Now, this round was completed in March last year, and you'll no doubt recall that the founder CZ was later pardoned by President Trump in October. Now, when the media grilled him on his decision, Trump was not happy.
His crypto exchange, Binance, helped facilitate a $2 billion purchase of World Liberty Financial's stablecoin. And then you pardoned CZ. how do you address the appearance of pay for play?
Well, here's the thing. I know nothing about it because I'm too busy.
He was not guilty of anything. That what he did, well, you don't know much about crypto. You know nothing about nothing, you fake news.
But beyond the Binance bromance, the rest of the leaderboard tells a clear story about where 2026 is heading, because centralized exchanges are rearming with fresh capital, and we saw Kraken raising $800 million ahead of a potential 2026 IPO, while Bullish debuted on public markets with a $1.1 billion stablecoin raise. Now, if Coinbase loses its monopoly as the only publicly traded crypto exchange, that is a significant structural shift that we can expect in 2026. But we also see that stablecoins are going mainstream, because Circle's $1.1 billion raise was one of Wall Street's most significant crypto deals of the year. So a key 2026 question is whether Circle can continue gaining share, including on Solana, as we see Tether's dominance slowly eroding. But it's not just stablecoins and sexes, because prediction markets will continue to explode in 2026 as well. We saw Polymarket raising $2 billion, while Kalshi closed a $1.1 billion round at an $11 billion valuation. Zooming in on Solana specifically, though, the two standout raises were Pump and Phantom, which reached $4 and $3 billion valuations respectively. So the key takeaway here is simple. Hundreds of millions of dollars are now primed to be deployed across Solana in 2026. That capital flow is a strong signal that crypto is professionalizing, it's scaling, and it's going even further mainstream. So what about those big, shiny predictions for 2026? Well, the final and most interesting prediction is perhaps that Bitcoin will reach $1 million. But before we get to those wild price predictions and their actual timelines, here are two of the biggest BTC predictions that we found. The first set is from K33 Research, who says that Bitcoin will outperform equity indices and gold in 2026, and that Bitcoin will set new all-time highs as well. And they echoed Raoul Pal and Bitwise's view that the 4-year cycle is a relic of the past. They also predict that we'll have lower volatility because of all the whale selling that happened in 2026. But they're not the only ones, because this thesis of lower volatility in 2026 seems to be supported by the fact that Bitcoin prices were largely unmoved by the US strikes in Venezuela. In fact, prices continue to rise slowly, suggesting either that we're seeing a decoupling of macro uncertainty from the Bitcoin price, or that it was somehow already priced in to some extent in 2025 by all that whale selling that we saw. Now, while we're talking about whales, and just before we get into more Solana-specific updates and of course that golden prediction report, it is worth noting here that the digital asset treasury or DAT era seems to be ending in 2026, with Bitcoin treasuries interestingly leading this decline, because all but one Bitcoin treasury firm failed to beat the S&P 500 in 2025, despite Saylor's strategy buying another $116 million of Bitcoin recently. And things are even more bleak on the Solana DAT front, because we already know from SolanaFloor's own reporting that holding a Solana DAT stock performed far worse than just holding Sol last year as well. Now, whichever way you look at this, DATs are looking down the barrel of a huge wave of mergers and acquisitions in 2026. The big fish will likely gobble up the smaller fish this year. We've been covering the DAT landscape for a long time now, so if you want to read about the systemic risk that they might pose, then here's your article. And if you say, no, I'd actually rather watch a deep dive video instead, then here's where you can get that information as well. All right, here's what Bitwise, BlackRock, Coinbase, Fidelity, Galaxy Digital, and of course other giants predict for crypto in 2026. And honestly, there's one major theme that runs through all of this. Stablecoins, tokenization, and regulation are the three topics that are shaping the future. The Bitwise report's 10 big predictions are as follows. Bitcoin will break the 4-year cycle and it will set new all-time highs, but interestingly, Bitcoin will be less volatile than Nvidia, which I find a curious prediction given their respective market caps. Now, they also predict that ETFs will purchase more than 100% of the supply of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana as we see institutional demand accelerating. That means number go up. Bitwise also expects crypto equities to outperform tech equities, that Polymarket open interest will set a new all-time high in 2026, that stablecoins will be blamed for destabilizing an emerging market currency, which technically means growing adoption, but also growing destabilization of fiat. Now, it's also worth noting here that JP Morgan also said this. Bitwise thinks that ETFs will double in AUM, that Solana will set a new all-time high this year if the Clarity Act passes, and that half of the Ivy League endowments will invest in crypto. Finally, they predict that more than 100 new crypto-linked ETFs will launch in the US. Overall, this is an extremely bullish outlook. Moving on to Galaxy Digital, who thinks 2026 is a bit too chaotic to predict accurately, but that 2027 will see a $250,000 BTC driven by increased institutional access and relaxing monetary policy. Perhaps even more interesting is that they predict Solana's internet capital markets will surge to $2 billion from the $750 million that it currently sits at. Now, BlackRock's 2026 outlook warns us that stablecoin adoption is widening, including integration into mainstream payment systems, which could potentially challenge government control over domestic currencies. Very similar to the Bitwise report that we just saw. The only publicly traded SEX in the world, Coinbase, is leaning into AI, and they're seeing privacy demands rise as surveillance awareness grows. Now, this one is a slightly funny one, but it does make sense considering the massive leak that Coinbase customers suffered from just last year. Fidelity, which is an absolute giant that actively manages $6 trillion, says more countries will buy Bitcoin as nation-state adoption increases. And we know that sovereign wealth funds adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets or gaining crypto exposure in general will be a massive development in 2026, because once a few countries do this, we can expect more of them to follow in quick succession. Another positive 2026 prediction comes from the world's most important bank, JP Morgan, which expects crypto to keep winning because investors looking for cryptocurrency as a potential store of value are now going to find a more friendly regulatory regime in the United States. They also believe that broadly, digital assets are gaining favor driven by the search for alternatives to the US dollar. And finally, 21 Shares published another bullish report about 2026, which claims in no uncertain terms that global crypto ETPs are on track to outpace the largest and most well-known Nasdaq ETF ticker, QQQ, by reaching $400 billion before the end of 2026. Now, if that ETF AUM number is even directionally correct, then Solana ETFs, which are now sitting at just over $1 billion in AUM, are not done with inflows, they are early. And that's why this whole week matters. The market isn't just pricing a rally, it's slowly repricing the idea that this stuff is becoming a default allocation for institutions, for banks, and potentially even for sovereign wealth funds in 2026. And because it's crypto, we can't end the prediction video without at least one reminder of how the industry is really not that far from being the wild, wild west, because none other than the legendary Razzle Khan and her boyfriend Ilya Lichtenstein are now out of jail. And in case you're new here, this is the duo which orchestrated the $11 billion Bitcoin theft in one of the most infamous chapters in crypto crime culture.
Higher than the sky can see, you can't get as high as me. Synesthesia I can see, big troublemaker, made rules cause I'm me, crazy outlier, notoriety.
Now, Razzle Khan is, of course, the super eccentric rapper persona / girlfriend in the story, and they unsurprisingly credit Trump for their early release from jail.
Never been much for romance, rather do my jerk-off dance.
Now, it's a funny but also darkly fitting note to end on, because that's the duality of crypto in 2026. In the same year that institutions are filing, stablecoins are scaling, and ETFs are absorbing all the supply, you still get the occasional reminder that this is ultimately an industry built on change. And my personal prediction for 2026 is that we'll see plenty more absurdity even as the industry continues to mature.
Bad bitch, motherfucking bad bitch, motherfucking bad bitch.
Fuck's sake.